everybody. Welcome to Cologne. I would like to start and warm you a bit up for today's and tomorrow's session with an update on Part 21 rulemaking. I would like to show you what regulatory changes have occurred in the past 12 months since we met last time in this forum, and also give you a brief overview of the ongoing Part 21 rulemaking activities. There was, for the first time since 2016, a change to Part 21. Part 21 has been adopted. The Commission adopted this amendment in March, and it was published in the official journal in June, and also entered into force in June of this year. This amendment covers three topics that we handled in three different rulemaking activities. The one that we also extensively discussed during the past year's DO and third workshop here was the topic of level of involvement. So in this amendment, which is in Regulation 2019-897, you now finally see the changes in Part 21, which addresses the topic of level of involvement, and also the other topics that we handled under this rulemaking activity, which were, for example, the possibility for organizations, for approved organizations, to get an additional privilege for major changes, major repairs, and STCs. So this is the completion of a very important rulemaking activity for the agency. There were two other rulemaking activities which also completed its life cycle in this amendment. There's a change to the environmental rules, Rulemaking Tasks 513 and 514, the Cape 10 Committee on the Aviation Environmental Protection of ICAO, implementation of the recent ICAO Annex 16 changes into, in this time, Part 21. The basic regulation had already been amended in that respect. And there's a small change which came out of a rulemaking task mainly addressing operational and continuing airworthiness topics on maintenance check flights. And while clarifying the topic of maintenance check flights in the ops and continuing airworthiness rules, there was also a need to introduce in Part 21 one additional purpose for a permit to fly for maintenance check flights. So you will see an additional sentence, a purpose number 16, in 21A701. So these changes you will find now since June in Part 21. There is a small amendment upcoming, which you will see in a couple of weeks in the official journal, amendment to Part 21, which will align with the recent amendment of the Continuing Airworthiness Regulation, Regulation 1321/2014. This Continuing Airworthiness Regulation was amended last year with Regulation 2018-11-1309, based on two opinions issued by the agency in 2016 and 2018, introducing in Part M proportionate rules, which is handled under the topic Part M Light, introducing safety management requirements, which is under the topic of SMS requirements in Part M, which then is handled under the discussion, Part KAO, Part KAMO, reorganization of this continuing airworthiness regulation. As we do refer in Part 21 to a number of provisions in this continuing airworthiness regulation in Part M, we also needed to adapt these alignments. So you will not see any change in contents, but we realign with the new structure of the continuing airworthiness regulation. And in the same regulation, we'll see the correction of some mistakes and one clarification to the regulation 2019-897 that we found after the regulation was amended. So this is a quite important development this year. In relation to the AMC guidance material supporting the application of Part 21, there were two amendments this year. Beginning of the year, we issued Issue 2 Amendment 8 of the AMC guidance material, which introduced proportionate AMCs for production and design organizations at the lower end of general aviation. The rulemaking task number for that one was 689, Part 21, proportionality. And in September, we issued Amendment 9, which provides the AMC and guidance material in relation to the changes that were introduced by Regulation 897, so the AMC guidance material related to level of involvement, the privilege, the environmental requirements, and the maintenance check flights. So please familiarize yourself with these changes. One important point that I would like to mention to you is the applicability of these new rules. As I mentioned, they entered into force in June, exactly on the 23rd of June 2019, and the applicability of these provisions was split in the regulation. Most of the changes will only become applicable next year, on the 23rd of March 2020. In particular, those one related to level of involvement, also the new possibility for permit to fly. There is a transition period of 9 months in the regulation. But 2 topics already became applicable immediately with the entry into force, meaning already today you have to apply them or you can apply them. The environmental rules, Cape 10 related, are already applicable, and also all the changes that we introduced in 21A263, so the privilege to approved design organizations, are already applicable. So you already today have the possibility, for example, to apply for an extension of your scope, so apply for a change to the terms of approval of your DOA in order to get, for example, a privilege for major changes. We discussed a lot of these changes, especially those ones related to level of involvement, last year and the year before in this forum. For those of you who are less familiar with the changes, and for those of you who want to refresh their memory about these changes, we have put some efforts in updating the information on our website, not only on level of involvement, but also on all the other changes that you will find now in Part 21. The topic is handled as a news item on our website. You see the topic, the title of it is level of involvement, but actually you'll find all the information related to this Part 21 change. So also the environmental ones, the permit to fly issue, the privilege, you all find the information related to these changes on our website. What we tried here is to compile as much as possible useful information that can help you to understand the purpose, the reasoning for these rulemaking changes. Also ideas on how you could apply these changes. We've put presentation slides. We put some videos of training, of presentations that we provided. For example, the session of 2 years ago, when we extensively discussed level of involvement, had been recorded, and you'll find now some extract of that on the website. So you can watch that if you want to familiarize yourselves with these changes. In addition, we organized in the second half of this year 4 workshops, 4 information sessions for you, for the industry, on all the changes that are now in Regulation 897. You see here the events when they took place, and also the statistics of your participation. So you see that almost 200 organizations, almost 200 design organizations, production organizations participated in these sessions. We had 367 participants. We still have provisionally 1 event in our plan that, provided there's sufficient interest, we may organize 1 further event. But we also recorded one of these sessions, the one in Cologne, and we are currently finalizing the director's cut of this recording, and in a couple of days you also find the videos from this training session on the website. So you can also find that training online and you can access it. In addition, based on the questions we received during these information sessions, we are working on a set of frequently asked questions where we see that it needs a bit further explanation on how the rules can be applied, some practical tips and tricks. And we are working on this, and we will also provide an FAQ section on the website with the question that we hear most in relation to the application of these rule change. So please use these possibilities and don't hesitate to approach us if you have questions, if something is unclear. We will try to respond to you on any of that. So now looking into the future, what is still ongoing in respect of Part 21? And before giving you some detailed or more brief introduction of the still ongoing Part 21 rulemaking issued with the Form 1. This is Rulemaking Task 0018, where we had consulted back in 2017 our proposal in a Notice of Proposed Amendment. We received a lot of comments on this proposal, especially because we proposed 4 criticality levels, and then related to the criticality levels, whether or not a Form 1 would be required. We have reconsidered that concept. We're going back to a yes or no decision, Form 1 yes or no, to only a binary system. This proposal is being discussed with the advisory bodies, and we are shortly before publishing the opinion. And we will combine this opinion to the European Commission with another rulemaking task, the one on instructions for continued airworthiness, Rulemaking Task 0252. The next one that is important is the rulemaking task on introducing safety management systems in Part 21, so for production and design organizations, implementing ICAO Annex 19, SARPs, Standard and Recommended Practice, into Part 21. Here we had consulted our first proposal, the Notice of Proposed Amendment, earlier this year. The consultation period by now is closed. We received for Part 21 something like 800, 900 comments. We are currently reviewing them. We are focusing on the changes to Part 21, and in a second stage also on the comments to the AMC guidance material that we proposed. Actually, most of the comments are probably in relation to the AMC and guidance material. So we are carefully reviewing the comments currently. So we are in the beginning of the comment review period, and the opinion currently is planned for Q2. Probably in the EPAS 2020 you will see Q3 is probably a bit more realistic in the third quarter of next year. This is the rulemaking task that I mentioned when I was talking about for parts without Form 1, instructions for continued airworthiness. Here we want to put more clarity in Part 21 on what ICA's instructions for continued airworthiness are and how they are used by the people who need to use them. We had split the task in 2 phases. The first phase is already concluded since 2017. The important bit, the definition and contents of ICA, is in its final phase. So we are shortly before publishing the opinion to the European Commission. Not in relation to the rule, to the regulation Part 21, we have a standing rulemaking task, what we call regular update to the AMC and guidance material, where from time to time we address non-controversial, non-complex and mature topics. Over the past years we had collected quite a number of proposals internally, but also from your side. You had proposed to us possibilities for clarification, for simplification of the AMC and guidance material. We are currently looking at all the proposals that we have received in relation to subpart J, so design organizational topics. And for these ones, we will publish in a couple of weeks. We just finalize the text proposal. In a couple of weeks, you will see a notice of proposed amendment, what we propose to change in the AMCN guidance material. I would already like to mention that we have much more proposals in our inventory, and a lot of proposals in relation to POA issues, production organization, and these ones will come in the next cycle of this regular update task, probably in 2021. And then, just to complete the picture, because we discussed this quite a number of times in the previous years here, the rulemaking task on embodiment of level of involvement in Part 21 has been completed. This was the core task that led to the amendment of the Part 21 regulation that I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. So to conclude and to give you a bit of an idea of where are we in the process with these different rulemaking tasks where we want to introduce proportionality, implement the new basic regulation and safety management system. This is a rough sketch of our rulemaking process, and currently there are no opinions, EASA opinions pending for adoption. So I don't expect that there will be further changes to Part 21 next year, beginning 2021. The rulemaking activities that have progressed furthest are the two on parts without Form 1 and instructions for continued airworthiness, where we will shortly issue the opinion. So this is the change in Part 21 that you will see next. The rulemaking task on SMS, we recently closed the consultation of our initial proposal. The rulemaking task implementing the new basic regulation, especially the bit on proportionality, GA proportionality, is already in the middle of the consultation. We plan to issue an opinion by the end of next year. For the other aspects, implementing the new basic regulation, we are still in the conceptual phase, so you will see an NPA throughout next year. And then the regular update to AMCN guidance material on the DOA issues, we are shortly before issuing the NPA, so we are at a quite early stage in the process. On this chart, this rulemaking task is the only one where we don't need the two right-hand boxes. This will not go to the Commission. This will conclude with a decision of the agency. All other tasks that you see here on the slide will go the full process until adoption by the European Commission. So thank you very much. I hope I could give you an interesting overview of the ongoing Part 21 activities. Do you have any questions?
Michael, there are a number of questions via Slido, and can we please switch the monitor to show the Slido questions? I don't know whether you can answer most of them, yes. But the easy access rules, yes. The update, for example.
That is quite an important one. Today, you don't find a consolidated version of Part 21. That's definitely an issue. We are working on two streams on that one. The easy access rules, we are currently working on an update. So you should see that probably beginning of next year. And in addition, the Commission also works on an unofficial consolidated version of Part 21 that you will find in the same folder, in the same remit as you'll find the official journal. And this unofficial consolidation by the Commission will be published with the entry into force, with the applicability of the regulation, so in March. You can also find there then the consolidated version.
Just some of the questions, like how many DOAs have applied for it and what will happen when DOA organizations didn't finish, that will be part of my presentation with the DOA update, so we will park them and come back to them a little later. Okay. But I think there are plenty of them for you still.
Yeah. So could you clarify the need for Part 21 change related to SMS in Part M? No, I can't. Sorry, Jill. I was not involved in that activity. The current rulemaking activity, I mentioned the change in Part 21, but what we are working in parallel is the SMS for 145, which is not yet there. But for SMS, the regulation 2018, now I have to see the number, what you saw, 1137, I think it was, the update of the Part M rules, that is now the rules. But the idea of safety management systems throughout all the agency rules is to apply the same principles. So if you happen to be familiar with the SMS requirements in the OPS rules, if you are familiar already with the changes in Part M, the changes in 145 and 21 will not be a surprise to you. We try to use the same principle. We are all implementing ICAO Annex 19. We want to build a consistent system within the agency rules, and also the AMC and guidance material are based on the same ideas and then just adapted to the domains where we're working in. There is a question on Switzerland, also a good one. So is there a forecast visible for the adoption of the new Part 21 amendment by Switzerland? So it's for Switzerland, on the one hand side, the treaty between the European Union and Switzerland needs to be adapted to include also the basic regulation and now Part 21. So for every regulation, this treaty needs to be amended. And the same idea also for the EEA states, so for Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. Also, the EEA treaty has to be amended so that Part 21 is also applicable in these 4 states, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. For the, now I have to see that I don't mix it up. For one of the 2 treaties, I've heard that it's in progress. I think it was for the EEA states. For the other treaty, I haven't heard any news. But be aware that if your organization is based in one of these 4 countries, you today still work under the old basic regulation, 216/2008, and Part 21 status before the amendment regulation 897. Only when these treaties have been amended, these regulations have been included, you are back on the same regulations. How do we register interest for the Derby info session? That is the info session that you'll still find on our website that we may conduct next year. So if you're interested, please send me an email, send an email to EASA, and we are currently keeping a list of people who were on the waiting list of one of the 4 events, which were, except one, all sold out. And for people who are still interested. So if you are interested, please let us know. We are maintaining the list. Why is the action area of Rulemaking Task 252 stated as manufacturers? That is an issue with our EPAS. So there are 2 issues. We're trying not to use the term manufacturers any longer, but specifying design and production. But the EPAS is still structured into different categories, and manufacturers is still one of them. I think in the, if I'm correct, in the EPAS 2020 you will not see that any longer. And also a number of rulemaking tasks are always affecting different action areas. ICA is one that affects continuing airworthiness and design and production organizations. So we always have to take a decision where to put it. And for this one, it was decided to put it in the action area design and production, so manufacturers. Any positive impact on Commission lead time for adoption of revised IRs? Gilles, I assume you're referring to the backlog that existed on a number of rulemaking tasks where the EASA had produced opinions to the European Commission, but it took a couple of months, up to years, until they were adopted. This backlog is almost cleared. So I think overall in the for Part 21, there's no pending opinion. We will later talk about Part 26, later today talk about Part 26, so the airworthiness requirements for operations. There we have one pending opinion, but overall, looking at all the EASA opinions in all of the IR domains, we are down to something like 5 or 6 pending opinions. So there's no backlog any longer. How are the EU regulatory changes somehow coordinated with foreign countries to avoid BASA or arrangement of impacts or any known validation activities? Also very good question. We do have very often and regular exchanges with our bilateral partners, where we update them on ongoing rulemaking activities, where we want to go. It's done on both sides. We learn from Canada, from the US, from Brazil, what the ongoing rulemaking activities are. We discuss whether this may have an impact on the validation of certificates between the countries. So that is a standard activities that we are conducting on all of the rulemaking activities. And then when the CID on ICA rulemaking task will be available, that will be published at the same moment with when we publish the opinion. So you'll find that on the website as well. Can we, sorry, the green one that now disappeared. Can you bring it back, Albert? There was one that disappeared. Yes, that's the one. Why is the LOI required for all DOAs, even if they have very low activities? We try to bring in proportionality depending on the activities. So if you're looking at the concept of LOI, if there's limited activities, especially when we're talking only about activities in relation to minor changes, minor repairs, ETSO, there's no need for you to do anything. You don't need to propose the level of involvement to the agency as part of your certification program. This is only the case when we're talking about applications for major changes, major repairs, STCs and TCs. So that's one of the top ideas that we implemented to bring in scalability in the regulation. Is there a clear process to assess the LOI capabilities of an organization? Yes, there is. I need to check. Robert, is that part of your presentation? No. Okay, sorry. Yes, we do have a process for assessing the LOI capabilities. So one of the criteria that is important in order to determine the agency's level of involvement next to complexity, criticality, and novelty is the performance of the organization in the past. And we do collect regular feedback from the PCMs and experts. This feedback is assessed and translated into a risk matrix, which is then the basis for us to decide whether the performance of the organization in the past, which gives you an idea of how you may work in future certification projects, if that activity or if this performance was in our categories low, medium, or high. We are constantly improving this feedback. and also the tool that we have to evaluate this risk matrix. But yes, there's a structured process behind it. So is there an impact on harmonization with the FAA? The same reply as the reply to Dieter Steger. There's a regular coordination with the FAA and all the bilateral partners on the ongoing rulemaking activities. So the question from Gilles Fontaine on the CID on ICA, you can delete. That is responded. So the only one that is open is the one from Martin Russell, but I don't understand the question. Why does the introduction of LOI drive a significant change to the DOA? Is it not just a new process for DOAs? So I'm trying to answer that. If I don't understand your question, Martin, correctly, please let us talk. So there are two different things. We tried to differentiate between level of involvement and, significant change. So you're talking about, yeah. Yes.
Sorry, can you wait until you have a microphone, please?
You get a microphone.
Good morning. Good morning. Martin Russell, Marshall Aerospace. So within the guidance material CT6 DOA policy, with regards to the introduction of LOI, it's indicating that for the introduction of LOI, it drives a significant change to the DOA. And I'm just trying to understand the reasoning behind that.
It's a significant change to your terms of approval. So for LOI, you need to adapt your procedures to introduce the procedures to propose level of involvement if you're working on TCs, STCs, major changes. So that is a significant change to your approval for which you have to apply and which has to be accepted by the agency.
I understand that. For me, it's just a new process to define how we drive our CDI. I'm not seeing it as a particular onerous new process. It's something we can implement with the guidance material available from the EASA, but I'm still not understanding why it drives significant change. Surely it's just an additional process. The impact in terms of level of safety is low because obviously on the first application using the new LOI methodology, that will obviously be subject to EASA oversight. So I'm still not really understanding why it drives a significant change.
The LOI is a new concept or refined concept in Part 21. And for the first time, there's a new obligation on organizations to propose level of involvement. And this is new. We didn't change anything on the rules on subpart J in that respect, but the importance of the change in LOI introducing these new obligations for you that needs to be reflected in your procedure qualifies in terms of subpart J as a significant change to your terms of approval, to your design, your DASA, design assurance system. So this is the reason it falls under the criteria of 247, and therefore you need to apply for a significant change.
Okay, I'm still not really understanding, but thank you.
Okay. We'll try to give you a reply afterwards. Then. LOI is very dependent on DOA performance. Can we have greater transparency of the EASA determination? We do give, or we have given in certain fora already an explanation of how we come to the DOA performance. If that is necessary, we can share that in a wider audience. Yeah.
And you will see that also in the DOA presentation and in the CEPIAC presentation, and we will share with industry more and more the way we collect feedback, what is the way we assess industry so that you have transparency on how you are assessed and how this influences eventually the DOA performance or the level of involvement when it comes to PCM and experts feedback. So we will share that in the future more and more, and hopefully via CEPIAC in the long term, you should have access to this also, but for the time being, it's just that this has to be discussed with their responsible counterparts from EASA. Michael, anything on this GA proportionality question at the bottom?
We will come to that in 20 minutes in the next presentation. Yeah. Are there any more questions than those, if we still have time?
2 more minutes.
When will be there an AMC and guidance material to Part 21 Issue 3 available? We currently don't plan to consolidate the official AMC guidance material. So we are at Issue 2 currently. Issue 2 was created to consolidate all the previous amendments to the AMC and guidance material. Currently we are focusing on the e-rules tool, where you do get a consolidated version. And you will see in the coming months a different way of us structuring the NPA and also the decisions for AMC and guidance material. We will immediately integrate the AMC guidance material with the rule. So by that, we may not need consolidated versions anymore in the future.
I will take the question on do we have to expect changes to LOI caused by experiences of FAA? I think one of the main purpose of LOI was to help us in ensuring that what we are looking at when checking compliance is what is critical and important. And therefore LOI is seen as a way to ensure better oversight of certification activities, and is going in the right direction for Europe. And next to that, we are very closely reviewing all recommendations that are currently being published in the context of the MAX accidents from the various investigations which are ongoing, and we are definitively analyzing all recommendations coming out for potential further improvements to how we do certification activities in our system. For so far, there is nothing that indicates that we have to have a second look at LOI concept.
Michael, maybe one comment on ETSO and ADOAs and how LOI affect them as a last question for this session.
Yes. So for ETSO, LOI applies. We also have to determine our level of involvement as for any other project, but there's a provision in 21B100, point B, you don't have to apply. You don't have to propose level of involvement. So you don't have to make the risk assessment, you don't have to propose your involvement, it will be determined by us.
Okay, thanks very much. As said, we will park some of the other questions and some of the questions will be answered during other presentations. With that, I don't know, Michael, you do it or one of the colleagues coming to the next slot, new basic regulation.
So, together with my colleagues Bodewin Doyce and Carl Garvey, I would like to give you an idea of what we are actually doing under this rulemaking task 727, introduction of the new basic regulation in Part 21. I would like to give you a brief introduction, and actually for those of you who attended last year's session here, you will remember a couple of these slides already. So I would like to give you first an overview of the new basic regulation and the need. Why do we need to change something in Part 21? And then my colleagues will introduce to you the idea of introducing in Part 21 proportionate rules for aircraft intended primarily for sports and recreational use, why we are doing that, and the concept that we currently have in mind of doing so. And then my colleagues and I would like to make you familiar with a new concept in the basic regulation, which is the certification of non-installed equipment. And we also would like to explain you why it is there and our first ideas of what you will see in the future as a proposal that we will consult with you. So in terms of a brief introduction, of an overview, these topics, these slides, you will remember from last year, just a bit of an introduction, a refresher. So the new basic regulation entered into force in September last year and repealed the old basic regulation, and making the link to one of the questions that we discussed just a minute ago. Regulation 216/2008 is still applicable in Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein today, until the treaty with Switzerland and with the EEA states are amended. The idea of Rulemaking Task 272 is twofold. The lower part of this chart, we need to introduce the changes in the basic regulation also in Part 21. I will give you a couple of examples in a minute of why that is necessary. And we are already, before we discussed the changes to the new basic regulation, dealing with the rulemaking activity on Part 21 proportionality and in Part 21. And we are combining now these ideas, proportionality, which now also in the basic regulation received some new tools in our regulatory toolbox in this one rulemaking task 727. On this slide and on the next slide, I would like to give you some ideas of why we need to change Part 21. The first two ones are related to our toolbox. So if you compare the old basic regulation and the new basic regulation, it strengthens two important elements that we can use for our future rulemaking, which is a requirement that we should be, where possible, more performance-based and more objective-based, and also allow different means of achieving compliance with the regulation. And we should specifically look at the scalability, the proportionality of the risk. The operation, whether the operation is open to the public, the effect on third parties on the ground, the complexity of the aircraft, persons' affected ability to assess the risk. So this is explicitly now mentioned in the basic regulation, and with all the activity that we are doing, we have to take that into consideration. Then, more on the content side, there have been some concepts in Part 21 that are now treated slightly different in the basic regulation, and we need to align that. So what you'll find in the basic regulation now is a possibility for approved organizations to also issue, under a privilege, more certificates than today. Today, we have minor changes, major repairs, and STCs. This is now more open in the basic regulation, so in the future one may imagine, if we implement that, also privileges for TCs or for OSD approvals. Then you'll find a sentence in the new basic regulation that it's not necessarily required any longer that engines hold their own TC. It is possible in the future that an aircraft can be certified together with the engine without the engine holding its own type certificate. Also this is not yet reflected in the Part 21. There is a new animal in the basic regulation, non-installed equipment, and a sentence which says that non-installed equipment shall be certified, even with the possibility to do this under a privilege for the organization. There is a new structure, slightly different requirements in the basic regulation for the issuance of the restricted certificate of airworthiness and the permit of flight, more in relation to a TC and a C of A. A restricted type certificate always goes with a restricted C of A. And then as an alternative, a permit to fly. Part 21 is not fully reflecting this system today. There is a possibility that under certain conditions, an organizational approval, DOA, POA, is not necessarily required if the risk is low. In that case, the basic regulation allows as an alternative that the organization can declare its capabilities and that it complies with the requirements in Part 21, and then the oversight of the competent authority kicks in. So no approval to be issued to start your business, you declare your capabilities, and then you start working and you will be overseen. There's also a possibility not to issue certificates to, for example, products, but that the organization may declare compliance with, let's say in our case, design requirements. So no TC maybe in the future, and only a declaration of compliance with design standards. Again, under certain conditions where there is lower risks, and we have to reflect that also in Part 21, whether and to what extent we want to go that way. There's a new Annex 3 for environmental essential requirements. In the past, there was a strict and only reference to ICAO Annex 16. If the product was not in the scope of ICAO Annex 16, no environmental requirements apply to it. Now the basic regulation says if ICAO Annex 16 is not applicable, then these essential requirements in Annex 3 apply. So we have to work on the environmental certification basis, maybe develop something like the concept of special condition to it, have to adapt certain other requirements in Part 21 that are today looking at safety only and open them for environment. And also a lot of terminology has changed, definition have changed. Parts, appliances, non-installed equipment, the definition of certificate has changed, the declaration has been inserted. So the list goes on. These are just the highlights that I wanted to repeat. We have to look at all of these issues, and we would like to familiarize you today with two of these concepts, of two of these aspects that we need to implement in Part 21 in a bit more detail. The one topic is the proportionality for rules for aircraft intended primarily for sports and recreational use, what we call under a slogan Part 21 Light, so the proportionality idea that I mentioned earlier this morning. And then the second topic on non-installed equipment, this new animal in Part 21. So we would like to start with the proportionate rules, and I would like to ask my colleagues Bodwin Doyce and Carl Garvey to support me here.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So I'm Bodwin Doyce. I'm a regulations officer, and together with Carl Garvey, we are the two guys in EASA working on, in particular, this change to Part 21, the proportionate rules that are primarily used or intended for aircraft used for sports and recreational. We call it Part 21 Light because that's easier to recognize what we are discussing. Again, to what Michael already explained to you, we are using some of the elements in the new basic regulation in order to do this proportionality for GA. The first one that he also highlighted is the possibility to build more performance-based and objective-based rules. If you look at the number of rulemaking activities that we show you, I think this is for our future a very important tool. If we are able to draft rules that are legally acceptable, but that can resist the change of technology, we will move ahead a lot and do better changes in our means of compliances and keep the rules stable. The second bullet point, the requirement shall be proportionate to the risk, is a bit of an open door, especially if you look at Part 21 Light. This is typically where we didn't have the proportionality that we needed before. The old-timers who've known EASA from the start know that we have been trying to work for GA, and we were always stopped by the basic regulation that said you have to have certificates, you have to have approved organizations. With the change of the new basic regulation, that door has opened, and this is what we can use for Part 21 Light. The last two bullet points are very important. Those are the possibilities to use declarations. There's one side of the picture for the organization. So a design and a production organization doesn't necessarily have to hold an approval from EASA in the future when the risks are acceptable low. And the same goes for the product. So we don't necessarily have to have a certificate or a type certificate for an aircraft if the risk is low. So these are the elements coming from the new basic regulation that will help us to shape the Part 21 Light. Very important in the concept that we're developing, because we're in the process of developing a concept. We don't have a full picture yet, but there are very important elements that we keep in our mind when we're developing all the ideas. I put them all straight on to the slide, and I'll go clockwise if you are still analog. So if you go from the top left-hand corner, it is important to understand there is no change in the responsibilities between EASA and the member states' authorities. EASA basically is still responsible for design. Production is still with the member states. So that doesn't change. The basic regulation hasn't changed that at all. So that is one of the starting points that we cannot change, that will remain. Second one at the top, a regulatory system for GA that allows progressive engagement with EASA. I think that's also very important to keep that in mind, that we've always struggled with new companies trying to get into the EASA world. Certifying your organization and your aircraft at the same time was really a steep ramp up to get into the EASA system. We're trying now to create a concept that allows a gradual introduction into the European system with the involvement of EASA, increasing if the risks increase. So we try to build a ramp up into the system all the way up to the full Part 21 if we can. The other corner, possibility to choose between two different processes to certify the aircraft, either go for a type certificate and a C of A, or go for a restricted C of A without a type certificate. And we try to build in really the possibility to choose depending on your business model if you need one or the other. So it's not exclusively one or the other, it depends on your business model. Next one is the possibility of using a declaration, first of all, to demonstrate the organizational capabilities. So that is one of the cornerstones from the basic regulation. And the other one is the compliance of the design with a cert basis or industry standards to declare that the aircraft complies with the essential requirements. The bottom one in the slide, product-oriented, using coordination between design and production, is something that you hopefully have already seen in the new AMC and guidance that was published for Part 21 for the lower end. We're trying to focus more on the outcome of the process, not the paperwork. We want to look at the product, the aircraft, the engine, in order to see if the process is well controlled and the design is well. That does require a close cooperation between design and production. You cannot look at the aircraft and without knowing the design. So, and when the design is the EASA's responsibility, an NAA looking at an aircraft and saying, okay, this should be the evidence that your production is sound, they need to understand the aircraft. So that's why it needs to be linked. Next one, certification process corresponding with the nature and risk of the product activity. That is already addressed. Yes, we have to build in scalability. The last red box is again very important. We need a cooperative spirit between all stakeholders. If we really want to be product oriented, we have to exchange information between applicants, production organization side of it, the NAAs and the EASA. So we have to share information in order to make it a light process. So what's the concept that we are developing? And I said we're in the middle. We've proposed so far in 2 workshops a proportionate system where we put a Part 21 light in parallel to the existing Part 21. So we are not going to touch Part 21 as it exists today. That would be a potential risk if we change something in Part 21 and we inadvertently affect something in large organizations. I don't think that will go down very well. So we're creating a separate Part 21 light where we initially said we're going to build this to a scope similar to Part M light. Part M light gives criteria on the design, the weight of the aircraft, these kind of things. But actually that doesn't really capture all the risks that we want to have in the scope. So we are currently still working on how to develop a right scope for Part 21 light that covers aircraft intended primarily for sports and recreational use, because that is what the basic regulation has asked us to look at. The process, if we go to Part 21, starts with a risk evaluation and to see if that application, that declaration really fits within Part 21. And if you go, or Part 21 light. If you go into Part 21 light, we'll have 2 processes in parallel. We still have a light certified process, that's in the middle, and we have a light declared process on the side. It's very important to understand that the basic differences between those 2 are, if you go for a light certified process, you go for a type certificate and a C of A, full swing, globally acceptable. If you go for a light declared process, there will not be a type certificate in that process, and it will end up, and this is also embedded in the basic regulation, it will be a restricted certificate of airworthiness. It's a European system only, so keep that in mind. I zoom in a little bit on those 2 processes, so the light certified process in Part 21 light, the one that we're developing. So again, it goes to a type certificate in the end of the process. It's an EASA approval and ICAO compliant type certificate. The whole idea, and this is the scope of Part 21 light, we want to use the process only when the risk is known and limited. So we only accept this for conventional designs, non-novel, using acceptable standards and widely used special conditions. So we know what we're talking about. This is not the latest urban mobility vehicle, this is really well-known aircraft. Looking at design capability, yes, you can still use a DOA if you want to use this process, but we also provide the possibility to use a declaration of the design capability. In brackets, with oversight, it is important a declaration in the system is not just I sign a declaration and I'm fine. No, we have an involvement, we keep contact. This is the cooperative spirit that we need to have. So a design organization with a declaration will still have visits from NAAs and EASA. So the same for production. Yes, you can use a POA for Part 21 Light, but you can also use a declaration of your production capabilities with the oversight again, and it all are still the basic elements that allow you to come to a full TC. So a declared production, a declared design organization can go through a certification process leading to a type certificate. The oversight is important. We do want to keep in touch with the applicants, the builders of the aircraft. So in this process, this type certification light process, we will be looking at the compliance demonstration plan, and the certification basis, of course, needs to be approved. And we will build in on-site checks before, first of all, the first prototype flies. We've so far taken 2 points in the timeline saying, we want to be there before the first prototype flies. That's our possibility to look at the aircraft in cooperation with the NAA. So look at the product, the way how it's built, the way how it's designed. And secondly, also an on-site check and test flight before the first production aircraft is released. So we have a few points in the process where we definitely want to see the product and visit the company. So this is light certified. EASA involvement leading to a type certificate. If you go to the other box in Part 21 Light, it's the light declared process. So there is a declaration of compliance, and again, the scope is not that different from the other one. It's for conservative designs, non-novel, using acceptable standards. Important here, there is no EASA approval in this light declared process. The responsibility entirely stays with the company, the person declaring that they comply with the requirements and the cert basis. That is not globally recognized. That is a European system that we're setting up. If you look at design and production capability, you'll see that it's exactly the same as what I showed to you on the previous slide. You can still be a DOA or a declared design capable organization, and the same for production. That is not different at all. Also, oversight is actually fairly similar, and the reason why it's fairly similar is that the oversight is really related to the organization. We are not doing oversight on a certification process, we're doing oversight on the declared design and the declared production organizations. Those are the elements, the very important steps that we have in this process. Where are we right now? Because we've organized workshops for this, and we have lots of discussions going on. This is not a meeting where we can do the same in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We are discussing development of this concept through workshops. We decided not to go for an NPA. It is too much of a development process for a good concept to put a final result in an NPO. So we are working through workshops. We started in Aero this year, had a second one in July, and a third one will be in December on the 18th. And this is where we develop and exchange the ideas on the Part 21 Light concept. That is really where you should be available. I'm not sure, Carl, we tried to put a slide up during the coffee break where you can find the event page and the web page where we communicate about this topic. I'm not sure if that will happen, but I will really ask you to get in touch with the EASA on this topic, get involved. We, Carl and I, cannot develop a good concept by ourselves. We really need your help. So please contribute. You can do it today with the Slido questions. You can also do it on our webpage, where we have a dedicated email address for questions about this concept. The end result of this process is that we are aiming for an opinion late next year that will go to the Commission for a Part 21 Light proposal. There was something else I wanted to share with you. Yeah, there's a lot more information. I cannot explain everything to you. We have a dedicated page on our website for Part 21 Light, and on that page is a PDF document that summarizes what we have discussed in the first 2 workshops. And more importantly, in that document, you'll find a number of flowcharts explaining how we see the process for certified and declared. Also interesting in there is that the second workshop, one of the main topics was, so how do we do changes in this process? Also for those processes, there are flowcharts in that document, and I really would encourage you to have a look. That explains how we think we can use the elements to make changes. Because we have to find a nice trick for declared organizations that, according to the basic regulations, will not have privileges, to still make changes and not be stopped in the whole process because they're declared organizations. So we've tried to find neat ways of making sure that also declared organizations can work with the system, make changes to their designs in a fairly easy way. Partially using CS10 if we have to, but the main elements is we try to work with the corporation, the link between us and the production and design organizations. With those regular visits, we are also able to cover these kind of changes to the process. So there's a lot more information. Please go to our website on Part 21 Light, have a look at the document, and your input is more than welcome. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Bodewijn. Before we break, I think we have a few questions on the topic. Maybe we can display the Slido questions on the screen. And Michael or Bodewijn, I don't know whether you can answer some of them right away.
Well, I can start from the top if you like. If the organization does not require EASA approval, then who's assessing the capability of the organization? Well, if this is typically pointing at a declared organization, the declaration will be fairly detailed, what we're trying to develop, and will be sent to EASA to be recorded and put on our website. So, first of all, we'll know who we're dealing with and how they're organizing themselves. What we will do is have a look if someone wants to apply the Part 21 process, we have to make sure that it's appropriate to do so. So we will have a look at the eligibility of an organization. Are you really an organization that should fit within this level of risk? So EASA will look at the eligibility early in the process when we receive the declaration from those organizations. So we'll know quite some detail about the organization, and we'll have a look at if you are in the right Part 21. The other one, can this also be applicable for non-EU organizations? That's a tricky one, but I think it probably will be. The same as we have today, that EASA also has responsibilities for companies outside of Europe if you talk about production, but you will be part of the European system, of course. How will this new proposed approach meet ICAO Annex 8 requirements? For the type certified, it is ICAO compliant fully. The thing is, in the declared design and production organizations, this is where we we start to deviate, and then we don't have an ICAO compliant process anymore. So the type certified process in Part 21 Light is fully ICAO Annex 8. I like the next one. Will parts made under the sorry.
To complement, and then
yeah.
The declared process is not ICAO Annex 8 compliant, and that's the reason why it's only a European concept, so you cannot validate these certificates in foreign countries. It's a national, in our case, European approval.
I like the next question. Will parts made under the declaration be issued with an EASA Form 1 or big question mark? Today, only a POA has the privilege to issue an EASA Form 1. So if we go for a declared production organization, that will not be the same EASA Form 1. We haven't decided on the details yet, but of course, the information with the release of a part from a production organization is still necessary to be provided to the next user in the process. So we'll have to see how we do this, but if it's a CFC or whatever kind of document in EASA Form 1A, B, C, I don't know, we'll probably, and that's again going to the objective rules, I think we probably have to define what kind of data has to be made available when a part is released from production. And that must be very clear, that if you are an end user, you need to know who manufactured, to what design, and when it was released, and if there are any restrictions. So there are a number of elements on the EASA Form 1 that definitely will need to be covered, even if a part is released from a non-POA. The next one, will urban taxi be relevant to light certification process? As I said before, we're looking at conventional designs. So if you fly a Cessna 172 as an urban taxi, maybe, but I don't see that happening. No new designs will not fit in Part 21 Light. One of the main reasons for that is actually that, first of all, we need to know the risk. But secondly, if we want to accept declarations, it's a declaration against a known standard. We're not going to accept declarations saying, I have blue eyes, I design aircraft. No, you have to show how you meet the requirements, and they need to be known. So our idea is that your declarations will be linked to known standards. Yes, I'm going to design an aircraft to CA23, level 1, this is the way how I'm going to do it. So I don't see in today an urban taxi being certified in Part 21 Light. It does highlight a very interesting discussion and challenge that we have, is the scope of Part 21 Light will be conventional, low risk. And what is conventional today might not be the same as tomorrow. New technology becomes daily practice in a couple of years. So we have the challenge to find a way to create something in Part 21 Light where technologies that might be very innovative today could flow into Part 21 Light in the future when we consider that we know what the risks are and we have good standards. So this is one of our challenges. How can we create a scope in Part 21 Light that is flexible, but at the same time giving sufficient legal certainty? And that is something that we haven't solved that puzzle. We're looking at what is SORA doing for drones. Maybe some kind of analysis of the risk could help, but still we have to find something that is linked to known standards.
Okay, one last question. The one on the production organizations who are currently overviewed by the NAAs. Who has the oversight in production in this new process? Michael, I don't know whether you or Bodo will have the answer.
So that's clear. We don't want to change the oversight, and we can't change because in the basic regulation it's clear where EASA has the oversight, where the member states authorities have the oversight. And for production, it's the member states. So unless you fall into one of the exceptions for a single POA, the basic principle of subsidiarity for production, also in the Part 21 light process, it will be the member states NAAs.
In addition to that, again, back to the basic principles of this idea, it will need to be a cooperation between EASA and the NAAs to look at the product. We need to know the design in order to check if the production makes sense. So, yes, it's responsibility NAA, but it will be far more a team effort than what we have right now.
Okay, thank you, Bodewijn and Michael, for the update on the requirements. With that, we will have a coffee break until 11, shortly after 11, and then we will continue with non-installed equipment, update and the concept and the ideas, which is fairly new, and we hope to have some interesting discussions with you. Okay, thank you. See you all back at around 11.